are recording this, so let's get started. We'll make the recording available to folks who RSVP'd and were not able to join us this morning, as well as to anyone else who wants to review this update on the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Begin with the antitrust policy statement. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with NRMCA's antitrust policy, and if at any time anyone has any concerns related to antitrust, please get our attention. We'll stop the meeting, address the concerns before we continue. Our agenda today is really just to give an update on what the Senate has introduced. As you may know, they dropped their bill at 9 o'clock last night. We do have an idea of what was in it before going in, and we're still going through just to confirm, but we're going to give an overview of what's in the bill, top line numbers, state of play in the Senate, state of play in the House, and then what we might see going forward and how this might play out. So first of all, what's in the bill? We can look at it as two parts. First part being a surface reauthorization. It's a 5-year surface reauthorization, extending the programs that were in the FAST Act, as well as adding new programs. It is based on the Senate's version of the surface reauthorization, which comes to about $318 billion, almost entirely for roads and bridges. It's also based on the Senate product out of Commerce bill, which is their safety and rail title. $71 billion, and then what would have been the jurisdiction of the Senate Banking Committee, but they did not complete consideration of their title. However, it includes $85 billion for transit programs over 5 years. The surface reauthorization part is funded through the Highway Trust Fund, which is funded through current gas taxes and diesel taxes, and the balance is funded for 5 years through general fund transfers. And then the second part of the bill can be thought of as infrastructure. It is above and beyond what is included in surface reauthorization, and it totals some $567 billion. Of that, $110 billion is for roads and bridges. Included in that 110 is our programs for major project construction, some multi-state, multi-jurisdiction, massive projects that have a significant economic impact. And then also there's a designated pot of money to repair and replace bridges. $25 billion for airports, 66 for rail, 39 for transit, which was negotiated down, one of the sticking points in the negotiations of this bipartisan infrastructure bill. And that's due mostly to the fact that transit received a significant amount of money during COVID through COVID relief. Broadband and then energy were two of the non-necessarily traditional infrastructure components. The infrastructure portion, as we've heard a lot about in the news, is funded through a variety of pay-fors. Initially, one of the biggest pay-fors was supposed to be enhanced IRS enforcement to collect taxes that were supposedly due and unpaid. That drew a lot of fire, especially from the right, and so that was replaced. There are about a dozen, 15 different pay-fors. Some of them bring in as much as 200 and some billion dollars. Some of them bring in as much as $6 billion, but the infrastructure portion is on paper paid for. Some of them pay-fors are a little gimmicky, what we know as pension smoothing, and other revenue generating acts like auctioning off bad broadband or auctioning off spectrum and selling strategic petroleum reserves. Nonetheless, they are nominally paid for, and that's a big win for Senate negotiators and also for those of us in industry who had made this being paid for a priority. The part that isn't paid for, as I mentioned, is the surface reauthorization, which is funded in part from existing revenue streams, including gas tax, and then the rest is general fund transfers. I want to note a couple provisions. We are continuing to go through the bill, but these are some of the top line provisions of note. The first is that this is a bipartisan, multi-year, 5-year bill, and that some of it's paid for. This has been a priority of NRMCA's Government Affairs Committee, that it be bipartisan, that it be multi-year, and that it be paid for. So we would note that some of it's paid for, not all of it. The rest of it's coming out of general fund transfers. Buy America provisions. So this has been a item of interest for the last couple versions of the House surface reauthorization. So House reauthorization bill included a fairly strict Buy America provision, but this Senate bill will include exemptions for aggregates, cement, asphalt, binders, and additives. This is a big coalition victory for NRMCA, NSSGA, PCA, NAPA, as it will largely exempt our product from the procurement requirements of Buy America. I mentioned the bridge repair and replacement program, the major projects program. Also included is the bulk of the one federal decision for permitting streamlining. This was included in the Senate's bill. It was not included in the House's bill, and we're pleased to see that it made it into the final version of the infrastructure package. A couple of things that are particularly interesting in that they were not included are minimum insurance and increases in minimum truck insurance. This is something that we fought in the House. It was not included in the Senate Commerce title, and the Senate Commerce title is what was incorporated in this package. So we're pleased to see that. It also does not include a rollback of the 2020 hours of service rules, something else that we fought. And we did a significant amount of advocacy and outreach at the Senate Commerce. And again, this was not included. Similarly, mandatory sleep apnea testing was not included. There was a big push to eliminate restrictions on new capacity construction. The House adopted a fix it first mentality and prioritization for infrastructure investment, putting some restrictions on what states had to do in order to build new capacity. These provisions were not included in the Senate EPW bill and therefore not incorporated into the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And finally, one of the big items for NRMCA and NRMCA members is the PRO Act. We had heard that the PRO Act was going to be included in an infrastructure package. President Biden included it in his infrastructure framework. However, it was not included in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. We did a significant amount of both grassroots and state-based outreach that opposed including the PRO Act in an infrastructure package or in a reconciliation package. More on reconciliation in a minute, but suffice to say that the PRO Act is not included in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So what's going on now? Last week, the Senate proceeded to vote on the bill. They thought they were close to final text. They did not quite have final text. There was some last minute negotiations that extended through the weekend surrounding mostly broadband. And the text was released at 9 p.m. last night. So we're still going through line by line, which at 2,700 pages is not a rapid process. Senate adjourned last night to reconvene at noon today, and they will begin the amendment process. It's likely to be a brokered amendment process between Minority Leader McConnell and Majority Leader Schumer, and they will negotiate which amendments will get offered. There'll be a number of procedural votes, each of which have a time attached to them. So cloture votes require 30 hours of post-cloture time. There will be 2 of those. But we expect this to pass the Senate by Thursday for 2 reasons. First, Senator Sinema wants to go on vacation. She made this very clear last week, both to the senators and to President Biden. And then also Senator Enzi passed away late last week, and his funeral will be held on Friday in Wyoming. And so a number of senators will be attending there. Jeff, you want to comment on anything I missed or any additional color or insight on this week in the Senate?
Yeah, I think that this has a reasonably solid chance of passing, hitting the 60 vote threshold, not only for the cloture motions, but a final bill depending on the amendment process. Honestly, logistics with the funeral is problematic. The backstory on Senator Sinema's vacation: she apparently told the president week before last that she was leaving on vacation, and therefore it had to get done. You know, candidly, it may be a bit challenging unless they choose to do the amendment process through the night. And there's a brokered amendment process, essentially on what amendments will receive consideration. When these things take place, it's typically done, at least on the Senate side, in such a way to prevent gotcha amendments that could either create poison pills in the bill or create vulnerabilities for certain senators. So don't know what the final number will be. Oftentimes they'll typically land around 30 amendments apiece to have reasonable time for debate. But with that, if they pass it, they're going to move on to some other issues. And in the upcoming slides, I'll talk a little bit more about risk benefit and what may happen downstream, which is still very unpredictable.
Yeah, so to Jeff, thank you. To your point, we think there's a high probability the Senate passes the bill this week, probably by Thursday evening. It likely will require very late nights, frazzled staff, and tired senators, but is most likely going to get done. We think they'll also do a budget resolution that will provide for the $3.5 trillion reconciliation package that we've been hearing about. We have heard statements from both Senator Sinema and Senator Tester that they will vote for the resolution, but they are not guaranteeing their vote for reconciliation. Which, yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
One thing that might be worth qualifying too is what that $3.5 billion budget means is not the same as the reconciliation package. Normally, the way these are done is they try to keep the top lines, pretty much the top lines, and a lot of generalities without getting into too many specifics, because that could create the no. For Sinema in particular, what this does is it's basically a bone thrown to the far left of the Democratic Party, and also in Arizona, that's threatening her in a few years on being primary. But her reaction, or the bigger reality though, is that budget resolution vote is politically very risky for the Democrats because of the national response overall. The real meat will come after the August recess as more public information becomes available on an actual reconciliation package, which to our knowledge is going to have fairly significant tax impacts, an international component, energy taxes that could be very problematic, and that may take Manchin out right there based on his legislative history. And so this will be an ongoing game with infrastructure, probably leading into October at the earliest that there might be passage.
Yeah, so we don't really want to get into what is or is not going to be in the reconciliation package, but it is important to note that the reconciliation package is very likely tied to the infrastructure package, despite President Biden's walkback of his comments after the announcement of the agreement several weeks ago. And this is because of dynamics in the House. So Speaker Pelosi has said, if you send me a reconciliation package, then we can do infrastructure. But if I don't get a reconciliation package, I'm not doing an infrastructure bill. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez over the weekend said that there are enough votes to block infrastructure, which when you're working as Speaker Pelosi is with a 3-vote margin, that's doesn't have to be a whole lot of votes. Complicating all of this in the House is the frustration of House T&I Chairman Peter DeFazio, who has essentially been on the outside looking in throughout this process and is even more grumpy than normal, considering that his $600 billion surplus reauthorization was essentially ignored. He passed this bill last year, he passed it this year, and by completely end running the House with his negotiations, senators have essentially put his bill on the shelf and told him they weren't interested in it. So Chairman DeFazio led a letter with about 30 other members of the House demanding that any infrastructure package passed by the Senate be conferenced with a House passed package. And so that's going to complicate the vote counting and the whip count in the House for passage of a bipartisan infrastructure bill.
Yeah, both of these, by the way, course of action Andrew talked about also impact time on the legislative calendar. The Senate, or I'm sorry, the House and Senate number one priority in September is going to be a continuing resolution, which should be fairly contentious. And if DeFazio gets his wish for a conference, that automatically is going to drag this out. And you face two scenarios. Either he demands something get included in a conference that has Republican votes fall off in the Senate and possibly Democrat votes, and the bill is stillborn, or probably more likely is he's given some face-saving, relatively meaningless changes to say that he negotiated an improvement in the bill and move that way. But because of the close margins, as Andrew mentioned, you have a lot of challenges that could easily move one or two members off. The Republicans are very angry about being walled out completely. And plus conservative groups have really amped up opposition to the Senate bill. And so essentially it's going to have to be passed with Democratic votes, and going to be a very challenging time to get this over the line. I think there's a better than 50% chance of it being enacted because it is an actual bipartisan product for a change. And that wild card will be on two fronts. It'll be one, what does the speaker do? If this delays out into early November and the Virginia governor's race is won by Youngkin, the Republican, look for panic in the Democrat ranks and then want to drop reconciliation altogether and just do this bill and move it, which is actually the sentiment of many Democrats in the House right now. The flip side being a remote possibility that Mrs. Pelosi can get to 218 votes or working majority. And that becomes the ultimate wild card on this bill, is if she still holds it pinned to reconciliation. And to Andrew's final bullet point there, this will come down to a presidential priority and frankly, the politics of 2022 for what they choose to do.
Hey, Andrew, this is Nathan.
Hey, Nathan.
Have we, with our relationship with Sam Graves, have we contacted his office to get him to weigh in on this kind of unique dynamic with DeFazio, and maybe to have him give us some more color on Pelosi and the progressives' desire to hijack this thing?
Yeah, I talked to both Sam and I talked to Paul Sass, his staff director at T&I. They're largely frozen out. They do not have a lot of say. They don't have a lot of hi. Okay, can I do this in 10 minutes? Thank you, sir. Yeah, working from home. So I talked to Sam, I talked to Paul Sass, his staff director. Their take on this is that there is sufficient discomfort among Democrats that it could be weighed down, but they also said that DeFazio might be the lone no vote. So those are two extreme scenarios. And I think it's still a wild card. Based on what Paul told me, they did not have enough intel to know whether they could be helpful in or whether them weighing in would be helpful at all. So that's a long answer to your question, but the gist of it is that Republicans are not really in a position of influence in the House in this. Although I will say this, if you do decouple reconciliation from infrastructure, I think it's pretty easy to get 40 or 50 or even more Republican votes to pass this bipartisan infrastructure bill. I think you have a lot of really pragmatic Republicans that would be willing to do that, probably Sam included.
Andrew, you said last week that the Biden administration had surprisingly given us some pretty good gives, especially as you talked about being the PRO Act is not in it, the Buy America provision. Do you think that this is going to be an administration priority to actually allow this infrastructure bill to get passed as a standalone bill and not have it coupled to reconciliation?
I don't know if it'll be. So yes, I think it is a administration priority to get this bipartisan infrastructure bill passed. They put way too much sweat equity into this to let it go. B, I don't know if that means decoupling reconciliation, but I think that they will. I don't know which is a higher priority, to be honest with you, Nathan.
Yeah, I think that the White House priority is privately is to get the infrastructure bill done because it actually looks like real governance. Certainly, the folks on the far left that talk about remaking the country are not, let's say, as politically sensitive to what the country can take. And if you basically, I had a discussion with a member of Republican leadership, not Kevin McCarthy, because he's just rather angry right now about things in general with his public spats with the speaker. But at a vote counting level where it gets particularly interesting with one of the senior members of leadership, he put it this way to me, that Biden stands a very significant chance of having the only thing that they get done at the end of this year being a continuing resolution, which is no kudo to anybody, and potentially the National Defense Authorization, which has improved somewhat since last month. Ultimately, if they want to get this done, they're going to have to do a de minimis conference, and they're going to have to decouple it. And if they do, a reasonably good piece of legislation can be passed that most members, in both parties can stand behind. If they don't do that, it's going to be a really ugly look for them. And I think at the end of the day, the last bullet point there, things like this require the president to lean in and make phone calls, do meetings, and ask for these votes. And having watched what Speaker Pelosi did when Obamacare was going to go away in 2010, and she forced the issue back to the front and sacrificed her members, you have a very similar situation here now, with a speaker working legacy politics. Will the president have sway over her to say, this is my priority, this is what I want you to do, and we'll come back for another bite at reconciliation later on and see what happens. I think that would be the smart political play, but that's going to be that's frankly the big unknown at the moment is what happens, and we're going to be strapped in for a pretty spectacular ride. My sense is from a vote counting on both sides is if they don't decouple, they're going to have a problem getting either done.
I'm actually encouraged by that caller, both from you, Jeff, and Andrew. My last question, Andrew, from a PAC and a government affairs perspective for our industry, are there any members of the House that we need to be making touch points or getting meetings with to try and help push this thing along in a decoupled fashion?
Yeah, so we will be doing outreach. In fact, thank you for teeing up my last slide. What can we do? So we've got grassroots. We've been running grassroots on both surface reauthorization and bipartisan infrastructure for the last few weeks. We've also been running grassroots on the PRO Act, but we'll be pushing out another grassroots effort that's focused on the House. We'll be sending out some template letters for companies who want to contact their members of Congress, state affiliate template letters, as well as some sign-on letters. I know a number of companies have done this already, and a number of state affiliates have joined sign-on letters led by the road builders and others. I think, Nathan, though, to your very specific question, we're probably going to want to identify some of those moderate Democrats who could be in jeopardy in a red wave 2022 midterm, and see where they're at and see what we can do to be helpful to convince them to vote for the bipartisan infrastructure package, and not just to vote for it, but also to be outspoken with the speaker that it is an important part of their reelection. So I don't know, Nathan, given your neck of the woods, that Mr. Cleaver or Cori Bush would be particularly amenable to those messages, but we can certainly try.
I'm up for anything, brother. Thank you.
Awesome. You always are. Love it. So that's what I have. So on this, one last thing, look for a grassroots, a letter, look for a toolkit from us in terms of company letters, and then for our state affiliates, a template letter for them as well. I see Michael Lamons has raised his hand. Mr. Lamons, the former chair of NRMCA Government Affairs Committee, and also Concrete Pact. Good to see you, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, Jeff. I appreciate the insights today. So I want to go back to just a question. I think, Jeff, you handicapped it as a 50-50 coin toss on whether we get to the finish line. I think back in your days jumping out of planes, you wouldn't have probably jumped if somebody told you that there was a 50% chance that they packed a parachute in the bag. So what do you need to see over the next month to be able to raise that level of confidence that we're going to be able to see the bill get to the finish line signed by the president? And really just high level observations, and then maybe Andrew, if you can add some commentary as well.
Well, having jumped out of the plane with one of those parachutes that didn't work, that had somewhat life-changing consequences for me, I could tell you that, yeah, if I had known that was going to happen, I probably wouldn't have exited that evening. But coming back to basic odds, you have several factors. If you look at the obstacles that could derail this, first of all is the cut of coupling with reconciliation. That's a huge issue to getting this done. And even if DeFazio were to roll over completely, which I don't think he's going to do. He's never been known as a shy, retiring individual, and can have a real mean streak, frankly, as some of us have witnessed. That vindictiveness on his part switches enough votes that this doesn't move in the House without certain compromises. And I think based on how long it took to get the Senate compromise in place, if they make any material changes to the bill, it's dead. That becomes the bottom line. And so any changes are going to have to be in a so-called conference would have to be face-saving as opposed to substantive, ranging from pay-fors to the compromises on resiliency, carbon, energy, broadband, et cetera. The flip side that, so I think number one is there a conference, and what happens with that? If that falls away, that's a problem. If Pelosi brings her members back for a vote in mid-August on a $3.5 trillion budget, this sounds like Kremlin watching during the Soviet era and who's standing on the platform. But do those budgets, do they pass the Senate budget? That's a kiss of death vote for many of the Democrats who are on the bubble right now. 48 of 52 members that finished under 52% are Democrats, and they're all targeted. And so you have both an electoral and a policy standpoint of legitimately being able to get to the vote. And no Republicans will help with a conference at all, with a conference if it resembles anything like the bill that DeFazio passed in the House and got sent over to the Senate. That's the shell. And essentially it's a pretty brutal process when you have a couple of years of work that's taken and the only thing remaining is the name. So those are those points. If Pelosi agrees to decouple and you do not have a conference, I'd probably put it at 90% it's going to pass, and it will be enacted. And it's the politically smartest thing for those that live outside the Beltway to do that and to make a case of a functional government. But beyond that, it becomes a toss-up, and each additional problem then becomes problematic. And as I've shared with some, not in this group, but when we went through the last time that you had high stakes politics like this with huge political risk was in 2010 with Obamacare. Speaker Pelosi lost 34 of her members when she had a 63 seat margin, and it passed by 3 votes. She has essentially a working 3-vote margin with Brad Schneider from Oregon already saying he will not support reconciliation. And so you're back to this conundrum of the chicken and the egg. And the longer it drags out, the more interesting politics get, because I just, watching this, and this will be the final point I highlighted earlier, that Virginia governor's race is going to be an interesting bellwether to watch, because we saw the same thing in 2009. Complete change of tone. The electorate is going to share something if you get a big surge outside of Northern Virginia and the Republican is elected. That's the canary in the coal mine going off, that they've got a big problem. And if the bill is not done by that, they have little choice but to decouple if they want to actually get this done. Otherwise, people are going to be writing their end. So they're taking a jump with a parachute. They don't know if the risers have been wired together by the rigger, or it's actually going to work. So we'll see.
Yeah, Michael, the only thing I would add is, to Jeff's point about giving DeFazio something to bring him and whoever he might be able to peel off from a bipartisan infrastructure bill passage, potentially earmarks. This was one of his pet projects, bringing back earmarks. If they give him the $5 billion in earmarks, maybe that brings them along. But I think the biggest thing for me personally that I would be watching for is action from the president, because whether or not you decouple, I think the reconciliation from the bipartisan infrastructure, if the president is willing to weigh in and he can keep the caucus together, to either just all, hold hands and jump with reconciliation or without. That's the biggest thing I would be watching for, because I think that the president's the one that got it done in the Senate. And I think that the president can probably get it done in the House as well. You have a little bit more entrenched fringes, but it's a very popular president. And I think that you would, with promises of help on the campaign trail and whatnot, be able to bring along the moderates to vote for the reconciliation bill if they got the infrastructure bill, regardless of whether the two were decoupled. So that would be my take. Those are the things I would be watching for. And we'll certainly be keeping our fingers on the pulse and reporting back any progress and continuing to urge NRMCA members to be engaged and facilitate that engagement.
Yeah, I'll leave you with one thought too, Andrew, just to amplify that, because I think it's the human side is often not looked at in politics. And when we came into the majority, the biggest problem that we had were ideological conservative new members who believed compromise was a 4-letter word, and they didn't know what hell was like living in the minority. And you got a very similar situations going on with the new Democrat members that were elected in 2018, that they have no idea what it's like to be in the minority, essentially be cut out of everything. The question is going to be, if it will take presidential engagement, is if he can weigh in to get them to move this bill forward. And I'm speaking of the far left of the caucus, to be supportive of this as the best possible deal that could be gotten in what's going to be a darkening political environment. And the bigger question is the folks whose confidence is not directly proportional to their experience and expertise. tend to be really confident about what they can do in a difficult environment. Going back to your parachute analogy, some of them just don't care, and they throw themselves out of the plane on the faith that they're the smartest person in the room without a chute pack, strapped to their back. And that's a piece of the emotion in this. The other question is how bad the echo chamber gets, having watched otherwise rational members in both parties collapse on all of their convictions over time. We're in for kind of a repeat of the emotional side of our democracy in process to see how this goes. And so my final pronouncement would be, I think you got better than 50% chance to get infrastructure done, much lower on getting an actual reconciliation bill done. We have to watch what presidential involvement is, and if they decouple reconciliation, in all likelihood falls away, and you actually get this the infrastructure bill done, which actually could be pretty good for the country.
Awesome. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
All right. Any other questions or comments, feedback? Happy to, I know we're a few minutes beyond what I had put on the schedule, but happy to take any additional comments or questions or discussion.
Great call, Andrew, Jeff. Thank you both very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Nathan. Okay, well, everyone knows where you can get me. You can call my cell, shoot me an email at any time, and I'm happy to chat on the phone or exchange emails or provide you whatever resources you need. So thanks everyone very much.
Thank you. Good call.
Thanks, everyone.